Welcome to TechRect. I'm your host, Alicia Kellstrom, with a background in B2B tech software and sales. I've spent the last few months exploring new opportunities, and along the way, I've had the privilege of meeting incredible people with fascinating experiences that I can't wait to share with you. Whether you're looking to break into tech, navigate tech tooling, or even coping with the hardship of layoffs, these stories will inspire, inform, and entertain you. Let's jump right in. Hey everyone, welcome back to TechRect. Today's guest is Louis Vera. Louis and I are connected through our professional network. We both worked for a company, but I don't know that we ran into each other when we were both working for that company, but he's since been very connected to some folks that I used to work with in New York. And it's great to have you on the show. Hi, Louis. How are you doing?
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. Overcaffeinated, probably, I think. I would love for you to start us off here and just give us a little bit of the lay of the land of your professional background. What is your niche? What is it that you do? What is it that you're up to today? Just a quick overview of your professional background.
Yeah, sure. So when people ask me what I do, I basically I say I'm a software engineer, right? Which is kind of a very general answer, but that's kind of how I see myself. I still consider myself like a builder, someone who enjoys technology, someone who likes producing products and is really excited by that aspect of things. But I have spent the last 5 years or so. My title was actually director of engineering. So I was building lending products for small medium businesses with a team of about 10 people. So that's kind of my niche has been kind of fintech. It's been a lot of regulated markets, but I'd say kind of where my focus, where my head is at, it's always been reliability. So how do I create software that is going to run quickly enough with a low enough failure rate that we're not constantly fighting fires or missing expectations? But then also, how do I translate stuff into how do we get there, but also how do I translate that into helping my team so that we can be reliable in terms of partners to a business, right? So we can deliver when we say we're going to deliver. It's going to work the way we say it's going to work, which is a non-trivial problem. Like, it's a really hard problem that a lot of organizations struggle with. So that's kind of why I've been focused there. It's just seeing that be an issue over and over and over in my career.
So tell me a little bit about what this is new territory for me. I'm not super versed in the world that you're in. What does constantly fighting fires mean? Like
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
going on?
So I mean, what can happen in a lot of cases, and you maybe experience this on the other side, right? Is if you come to us and you say we want to build this website where people can apply or can purchase our product or can self-help or turn on their subscription to a new feature, engineers we say like, yeah, we can build that. We know how to do that. And you say, okay, when can we have it? And we say 2 months, right? And so sometimes the problem is 2 months come and go, and it's like, well, now it's 3 months, maybe four, right? And that's terrible because you've got other, you've got other things we're accountable to, right? Maybe we've got marketing budgets, or maybe we promised clients things, and then like it creates organizational issues. But what can feed into that is if we do build it and get it to you in 2 months, but then don't work correctly, right? So the next thing we're like, oh, we'll get to do the next thing in 2 months, but simultaneously we're still trying to make the first thing do what we said it was going to do, right? So it can become this downward spiral, and lots of organizations see this downward spiral, right? Where it's just like things get like slower and slower to use, or like less and less reliable to use, or like they're delivering future things more and more slowly because we're actually like still doing the first thing, right? That we didn't quite get right. So it is just a problem of organization. You can't know what you don't know, but at least I've focused on finding strategies to try to like minimize, that amplification, right? Like that downward spiral. Stop that from happening, right? Because once you're in it, it's kind of tough to break free of.
I mean, and I'm just imagining what is the cost to a poorly operating website? It's that customer is going to click away. Your job
Yeah,
is to make sure that the customer stays on the page, right?
it's a poor experience, and also it's even just knowing the customer, like the dollars and cents, right? internally it's a problem, right? Because then your trust starts breaking down. So now I tell you 2 months, and maybe you're going to tell a client 3 or 4, right? Maybe marketing's not going out for an extra 3 months, right? Everything starts to become suspect. Maybe you don't want to tell us about things that aren't working well, right? Because then you know that that's feeding into the thing that you need next, right? And that's not good for anybody.
That's that's crazy. So what's like the best practice to ensure that you're staying on the timeline that you said? Do you overpromise or sorry, underpromise and overdeliver? Like how do you navigate that?
There's definitely, yeah, there's a lot of things, and I don't have like the, there's, I don't have the perfect answer, right? This is going to be a problem that we just struggle with for a long time, probably. But yeah, putting in some buffer time, having some experience, like building things you've built before is very helpful because you've seen how it's worked before, or you've already, solved some problems beforehand. So they're much quicker to solve the second time. Having like a plan B and plan C, right? So it does, it's partially overpromise, underdeliver, but it's more like me and you, like if we were working together to create a product, right? Okay, what are the things we would love to have? What are the kind of things we must have? How do we play with that room in between to say, okay, if is 2 months more important than all the want to haves? And can we try to like schedule for that? And then when things go awry, we start paring back a little bit. And it's just kind of like working through kind of contingency plans. And to be honest, it is just having a very comprehensive plan, which is maybe something that isn't always the case, right? Trying to draw out as much detail as possible beforehand so that we at least know what we're getting ourselves into.
It reminds me of the HGTV show Like It or List It, and it every single time or anytime there's any sort of plan for construction, it always goes crazy. Something you
Yeah,
don't know is going to happen happens. You have to have a plan B, plan C. You have to either have more budget or shift budget, right?
absolutely. Yeah. And I think people in that industry, right, they know to have some buffer. They also know don't open the wall. Do not touch anything you don't have to touch, right? Because there's there's only risk behind that wall, right? Like you don't want to see what's back there.
Yeah.
So it is kind of being very focused and mindful of what can go wrong and having some idea of how to tackle it. And I think it's scripted for TV, right? With drama, like, oh my God, what are you going to do? But they know what they're going to do because this happens all the time. Like you said, every time there's always going to be something unexpected, right? So planning for the unexpected. Is there extra budget to play with? Do they have some techniques that they've used before to, in a low budget way, solve a problem and keep moving? So
Yeah. That's wild. Well, thank you for kind of peeling back the curtain a little bit there on that and your world. So, what has been going on in your world of late? This is the Tech Rect podcast. We talk to people or talk about the current job market. What is it like out there? So, have you been out there, and do you have any stories to tell?
I have, yeah. So I had kind of been in this director position for 5 years. Recently, I'm transitioning back to still leadership, but more purely technical leadership. So staff engineer, which will still kind of work with leading teams and helping with kind of some of the problems I mentioned, but maybe take some of the people management off of my plate. And yeah, so it is a very challenging market, probably the most challenging I've seen since the beginning of my career. My heart goes out, right, to a lot of people who kind of never seen something like this before. They're really like having a very, like rude introduction to market swings. So it is a tough market, but it isn't an impossible market, and it does look like it's improving. So that's hopeful and optimistic. But yeah, so I've spent some time looking for a new role and trying to transition maybe my role a little bit, and I can kind of give what I did and what I think works and what I've read from others that is helpful.
Yeah, actually, spoiler alert, I've seen Lewis's framework. So that's what we're teeing up right now. We're going to talk about just how this very organized chart of how you approached your job search and navigating the current market. Someone told me, and I need to do a little research on it, that the current market is for tech is as bad as the dot-com boom or the dot-com crash or whatever in 2000 or 2001. That was a little before my time, so I don't have firsthand experience with that, but I might need to ask some folks that are, a little more tenured to see if they agree. Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, I've seen kind of that thrown around. I don't think it's quite that bad. I also didn't experience the dot-com crash firsthand, but I did experience the aftermath. I'm willing to bet like a lot of that maybe is driven by entering your profession right now is probably as hard as it was then, right? The aftermath of .com was very challenging for people without experience. And I'm sure that that's the case now. I'm willing to bet that that probably, from that perspective, is probably just as bad. Yeah. From the perspective of people with, there's lots of layoffs and people with experience and just kind of having to figure out what their next role is. I think it's probably not quite as bad, but
Well, that's
it's
good.
all relative, right? Like the pain, if you're experiencing like acute pain, right, it's not helpful if someone say actually something else hurts worse, right? Like no,
Right.
it doesn't matter. How am I experiencing this? It works out too.
Yeah, I
um
agree. I am a little worried for the new grads coming into the job market today. However, I'm seeing them. There's a ton of entry level sales jobs at least. So I'm hopeful that it's in other categories as well or other functions. And I am also trying to be hopeful that the market is moving in a positive direction now versus the overwhelming complete contraction of 2023. So tell us about your framework and how long were you using it for? What was the timeline? For me, I've been in this job market since around December. So when did you kind of start looking around?
yeah, I started probably in earnest in January, so kind of like new year, post holidays. Okay, let's get focused and get to work. And so that's been a good 3 or almost 3 months, right? Which again is it different than it's been, but still feel extremely lucky and privileged that it's hasn't been worse than that.
I think January was a good time. I mean, granted, January was still tough, but there was more movement and more budget being released in January than
Yeah,
there had been in December. So January, it started to go forward, and then obviously you didn't have to look for very long. Your framework incorporated a section for getting organized. So what does that mean? What did you need to do? How did you keep track of how to be organized in your job search?
yeah. I mean, I take a lot of this from my professional life and kind of just translate it to like it's a new focus, new product, new goal, right?
Yeah.
It's an overwhelming task, right? How do you network, right? You could do that 24 hours a day. Eventually, you need to sleep.
Hmm.
How do you apply? Where do you apply? How do you research companies? This is just like there's an insurmountable amount of information, and there's like an insurmountable number of opportunities for you to like try to increase your odds. But like we have other obligations, we have fixed amount of time, we have a fixed amount of maybe money, maybe we're also doing things to make ends meet. So for me, it was really focused early on like, okay, get organized, create a list, right? Similar to a project plan, like what are the things I could do, right? What are the things that, and it flexes, right? I see other techniques, I talk to other people, I have other strategies come in and I can kind of incorporate those into what's there. But it really is like, here's everything. What do I think the highest value things on this are? What are going to move the needle the most? What is going to pay off? Some things accumulate more value over time, right? So what are the things I want to front load so that they're there later? And there's no magic to that either, right? You're going to have to make it's kind of like some subjective calls, but just having that in a place so that it's not overwhelming me with the number of things that I've forgotten to do or the number of things that are on the list, like the analysis paralysis. I very much suffer from engineer brain. I need to be able to constrain the problem or I'll just spin on all the options. So that's where I
That's an
focus first.
interesting experience because for me, I also kind of did a thing where I was like, maybe I want to go into enablement, sales enablement, and then I realized, no, I can't because I don't have experience. The job market is very competitive right now. It doesn't make sense for me to try to pivot at this point. So then I had to look at my professional background. I was like, okay, I've done account manager roles and I've done customer success. So those were kind of my two options. But why don't you share all the different skill sets that would apply for your world and function, just so that any other burgeoning the right word, software engineers can think about it the way that you were thinking about it too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's similar, right? I mean, I think you've mentioned this on the podcast previously, right? There's a lot of hyper specific roles available, right? So
Yep.
it is tough to cast a wide enough net to give yourself opportunities, but also at the same time, maybe to develop that expertise that the market seems to be looking for or demanding. So yeah, I mean, there's different industries, right? Like what industries have you worked in? What industries do you understand? What industries, regulated industries? Obviously, there's some benefit. Like this person knows the regulations or knows the rules and has been trained and has passed the background checks and things like that. But on the tech side, right, there's different tech stacks, right? So like, where have you spent a significant amount of time? Which ones do you know best? Like, do you write a lot of front end web code, or do you write a lot of back end Java code, or are you a systems programmer? And in tech, we've always been able to move pretty freely between a lot of different areas. But yeah, right now it is really kind of taking stock of like, okay, where is your kind of center of mass, right? What can you craft out of your experience where you have maybe the best shot? You bring the most to the table. You'll be one of the more sought after candidates, hopefully, in
Yeah.
some specific area. So it is really picking a tech stack or knowing which tech stacks you would easily do well in, knowing areas if there's any specific technologies that's helpful, right? And kind of maybe you focus more of your search there.
That's clear. Yeah. I had trouble because I'm like, obviously I'm not in that world. So I think that's helpful to orient around that. And you're right, the hyper specificity. I have a communication degree, so I could do a whole bunch of different things. I just
Yeah.
happen to have this experience in account management. So, and right now it is important to just kind of keep track of where you've been successful. Maybe if you have metrics around that or how you can showcase your skill set specifically. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And like metrics is a great example. And part of this has been a learning experience for me in terms of I haven't been in the job market for a very long time, which again, like it's extremely lucky and I'm extremely grateful for. But I've been able to have a reputation and a network where like things have typically gone from an opportunity with someone I know to another opportunity with someone I know, which has been helpful.
Mm.
So some of this is realizing maybe blind spots and maybe not having done as much as I could have or should have along the way, right? So metrics is a great example. I really do wish I'd accumulated more metrics. Engineers, we look at metrics and dashboards for lots of things all the time. And if we're working in startups, we've probably gotten really used to asking metric style questions, right? What is your customer acquisition cost? What is your lifetime value? Things that are going to kind of help us to understand, is this going to be a long term opportunity or not? But maybe done a poor job of accumulating those along the way for myself. So having to try to backfill those has been difficult and definitely a learning experience, right? Like going forward, right? Check in on, on your own progress every so often and write things down and keep a quarterly journal, if not
Oh
more
my gosh.
frequently. And
The amount of times I've told myself to do that and then not done it.
it's tough. I mean, it's tough because it's similar to a job search, right? There's an overwhelming number of things that you could do. So it really is like, what are the highest value ones? And a lot of times that one slips. But we recognize and for good reason, right? Because when we're focused on an opportunity or we're really, invested in our job or our role, it isn't high value, right? Writing down what I did is not producing nothing for me at the moment and nothing for the company in the moment. But recognizing that these downturns happen, we really do need to take better care of ourselves, right? Put some time on the calendar for yourself, right? To make sure that you're covered when these kind of things happen.
And I think it's interesting for you to say that in particular, having come from a leadership position, knowing that performance reviews, you want to make sure that you can showcase your accomplishments throughout the year. And it's really hard if at the end of the year, it's like, oh gosh, now I got to go through 12 months of my Slack history and my
Yeah,
calendar and documentation. But even leaders have to prioritize other important work. But it's really important to make sure you're writing down your accomplishments.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's maybe the salt in the wound, right? Is that we always struggle with this. It's not a new problem, but we do manage to get something out often for most orgs. Not maybe not most orgs. For lots of orgs, we get something out at least once a year. And I don't even have that, right? So like it's as simple as keeping it for myself as opposed to in a system that I won't ever access again, right? So
I think
um,
it might be beneficial to have some sort of app. There's got to be an app for that, a Slack
yeah,
integration. And then hopefully before a catastrophic event like a layoff, you have the opportunity to download the history of that app's interactions with you. Okay, I'm thinking about a business, and now I'm going to have to get this produced.
There's absolutely opportunity there, and there's absolutely challenges with it. And I've thought about this. I've similar to you, like I've spent some time thinking about this, right? Like it is a solvable problem. I happen to have been in a regulated industry, and I'm not sure how I would have been able to do this in a way that was maybe living up to like my obligations in terms of data security and data
Right.
governance. And but yeah, I would love for there to be an organizationally sanctioned way, right, to carry with you the
Yeah.
history that you've accumulated and your notes and things that don't have any real proprietary data or value to the company, but do have tremendous value to the person. It could be tricky in some areas, but for lots of people, right, it would be a really amazing app.
Interesting. Okay, well, you and I can sidebar about that
Yeah,
later.
yeah. We could do some
Especially from,
storyboarding.
yeah. So what else from your framework do you want to highlight? I love, you have a section on community. That's one of the things that I have found really helpful in this time is getting involved in different women and then sales and then other, mostly sales and then women led women focused organizations or Slack communities. But you've got a whole
Yeah.
list. So what else have you kind of tapped into?
Yeah, I think fortunately and luckily, like where I've found some success is obviously working my own network for referrals. I think that has been really successful, and I think that's probably in terms of prioritizing your list, right? That needs to be the top. Where can you find people, and that helps because they can get you into the process. One, and a lot of places do put a lot of stock in referrals. I did as well, but they can also give you more information, right? Is this an opportunity that you're interested in? Is it one where you fit? Like, what are they actually looking for? What's the day to day like? Is this a role that's going to get filled? Is it a role where they're maybe prospecting, right? They're just
Hmm.
checking, they're thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's all very helpful. That is just like so much like head and shoulders above anything else you could be doing. That is definitely the place I would focus first. But yeah, I think the other thing is building any sort of community obviously has tremendous value. But yeah, I think the other thing is we are in a situation where there's like high volume, right? And maybe low investment in terms of reading through resumes is not getting a lot of energy or time. Looking for people, thinking about people out strict criteria is probably not happening as often. So how do you get yourself out of that fray, right? Like how do you get out of the 1,000 people applied to a LinkedIn position and into a smaller pool where maybe there's more consideration, right? And I'm sure lots of people accumulate past company Slacks, alumni Slacks, these networks where you've participated and maybe people know you is helpful, and offering making it a two-way street, right? Like other people in that group are looking too, and like having people post things that they find that maybe you haven't, or offer transitive referrals, right? So like I know someone here who's hiring for this is
Right.
really like a very common post on some of these smaller groups.
Yep.
But yeah, like affinity groups, women's groups, regional groups, things in your neighborhood, in your network. The roles that I ended up going the furthest with were roles that were locally based in some form or fashion, and even like doing like a return to office or hybrid schedule. And that's just like shrinking that pool, right? So like you're not contending with the broader country or even internationally. Is these are people in your area, in your city. It's helpful, right? The other thing that really think maybe because there can be a bit of shame, right? Maybe you really invested a lot in your career or in your role, or your role had a huge impact on like how you see yourself, right? But you really have to kind of swallow that ego, and you got to tell people your story, right? Here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I do. Here's where I came from. Here's and just it was shocking to me. I had people reach out that I would have never expected.
Wow.
People further back in my work history who have offered the same thing. We're like, hey, we're hiring for this, and it's not, we haven't started yet. This is a great
Oh, that's
place to get
awesome.
in early.
Yeah.
Um, or people that I've helped previously get introductions to companies or people that I knew who just reached out and said, how do I pay that back? How do I help here? This is a place where maybe that you don't prioritize, right? If I had gone through and said, here are the people I know that I think are most likely to be able to help me, and and then intersect that with the people that actually did help me, it didn't overlap a lot, right? So cast the broadest net there, right? Tell everybody, talk to your mom, talk to you. Everybody knows
Yeah.
somebody, right? And you just never really know what they know or who they know or what they are willing to like do to help you find your next role, right? So
The other thing
um
that I have had happen as well is attending a webinar, either on a product or a sales methodology or whatever it is that they're talking about that interested me, and then interacting with the attendees of the webinar, either in like the chat.
yeah,
And then I have found contacts in those as attendees that are working at companies that are hiring. And so I will message them and say, hey, I just attended this webinar. You were on it. I'd love to get connected because I saw an opportunity at your organization and I'd love to chat about it. So that has been a channel as well.
yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, every opportunity to like kind of grow the people you know and interact with new people, right, is really expanding that network. And there is opportunity in that. It like the one of the things is like when I say tell your story, I say cast as broad a net there as possible because that's relatively free to you, right? Like you can do that very, very low time intensive way. When it comes to attending networking events, there's only so many you can do, right? Like, see those, I definitely think I
Yeah.
I want to be part of certain communities and I will engage heavily in certain ones, but I can't be part of all of them. So maybe I'm a little bit more thoughtful about who and where and why that I'm trying to make those connections.
Yeah.
Um, and that is actually another suggestion is like for engineers, and I don't know if this actually produces any real long-term value, but things that I've seen others do and have done myself to some degree is like there are open source projects, there are open
Oh,
source
yeah.
organizations, there are places that are looking for your talents. They are obviously looking for your talents on a volunteer basis, but it's a really great way to meet people, especially if it's a place you're interested in, that they are similar in mindset, similar in skill set, and really, really connected to similar networks that you might not be. So that can be a good way to spend some time as well. Again, that is a time intensive act, so you have to weigh it against the other things, but it can be, yeah, it can really be helpful and it can be enjoyable as well. I mean, lots of people have long-term communities that they're part of now from that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, we're down to the last 2 minutes and we
Yeah,
still haven't even talked about the last thing. So in a really fast, like under
yeah.
2 minutes, this is your hack for the community. Tell us a little bit about how you approached it, making sure that your mental health and well-being during your search.
Yeah, no, so I think that's for the you know, kind of disclaimer, right? It's a very privileged thing to be able to maybe focus on yourself and your mental health, but a very it's a very toxic process, right? People are not built to excel with constant rejection, right?
Right.
And part of a job search is that. It's definitively has to be that, right? Because as soon as you find non-rejection, you're done, right? So it can be very taxing, it can be very painful. You need to know that that's part of it and figure out how you're going to give yourself small wins at intervals that can keep you sane, right? Keep you healthy, keep you like not feeling demotivated because it can be a long haul. Some things that I've heard people say is limiting actually their time. They only put certain amount of time into it every day and they don't go beyond that. For me, very specifically, I can find myself in like a doom spiral of LinkedIn, right? I think we have engineered like algorithms to feed us things that make us angry or sad. And that can happen, right? And it's maybe being conscious of that and limiting your time in those situations. But for me, right, what are the source of wins? For me, very early, very specifically, it was daily exercise. That has been huge for me. It's really improved my mental health, really improved, I think, my overall health, and really given me more energy to invest in these things that maybe take more energy.
Yeah.
So it's a source of energy, right? Like find that source of energy. But for other people, it could be like crafting, gardening, volunteering, all of these things. For me, exercise has been huge. Physically, I feel better. Energy wise, it's higher, especially if you have done a poor job of incorporating that into your daily life previously. It is a very easy source of wins. You will see changes.
Ooh.
For me, there was like, it took some time, like 2 months, but that's a pretty short cycle, right? To actually see some things start to improve. And
I
um,
think they say it
so
takes anywhere from 30 to 90 days to make or break a habit. So really depending on what that habit is that you're trying to make or break and how easily it integrates into your life and doesn't create friction. But you're so right. I mean, it's so hard for me because I will sit down at my computer just to check something, and then 2 hours will go by, and I'll be like, well, that was
Yeah.
my time to exercise. And now I'm not going to do it because I've got other things I need to do. And then my brain starts melting. And by the end of the day, I feel exhausted.
Yeah. And that is something that I'll be kind of more conscious of going back into a full-time role, is like, how do I defend that time, right? How do I prioritize that? Because I think it has been really helpful, and a lot of good reasons to try to put that maybe not first, but closer to the top instead of the bottom of
Yeah.
a priority list. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be that, right? Like, I think, my maybe the last line I was going to drop is just like with the Marie Kondo thing, right? What sparks joy? Everyone has something that gets them like that makes them feel, good about themselves, or like about what they've made or what they've accomplished. And what is that thing? And go do that for, it doesn't have to be a long time, right? 30 minutes or whatever. And it's also, that sounds impossible. I realize that 30 minutes a day is an impossible ask, but it it has payback, right? You're gonna have get more out of that going into your day and going into the other obligations you have, and it's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. You really need to protect that time, put boundaries around that time, make sure that you're prioritizing on yourself. And also, what you said is really important too. It's kind of funny because in sales you're attuned to being rejected all the time, constantly, because you
Yeah,
really win rate for outbound is pretty low. And so we really do celebrate when one person responds out of like 100. So I feel like we're a little more attuned to that rejection. But yeah, finding the little wins to celebrate in your job search is really, really important so that you don't go down into that negative spiral, because that will impact how you put yourself out there into the world.
yeah. How you
So,
present, and like how people perceive you, it's definitely palpable. It's important.
yeah. But, like you said, it is kind of a luxury to prioritize
Absolutely. I
yourself when
I
there's
100%
bills to
understand.
pay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You're doing what you have to do to make ends meet, I understand. Like, that is not a place that anyone's going to be their best self, right? So that's extremely stressful.
But even
Um,
within that, there's so many opportunities out there to monetize on a independent contractor basis. You can get a very small amount of bridge the gap income that can occupy your time. Like take a contract job in whatever it is that you're good at doing, or maybe whatever your hobby is. If you're, I don't know. But there's some way you can
yeah,
figure out a way to make some side money while you're still looking for a job. And that actually might help you in the longer run too.
yeah. I think there's probably some like perspective and skill building and networking that's happening in that sort of area too, for
Hmm.
sure.
Yeah. Well, it has been wonderful chatting with you, Louis. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your perspective and your framework. It's just been a great conversation to talk about making sure you're being super organized, making sure you're prioritizing your specific skills and how you can best present yourself, but also your mental health. So I really appreciate what you've shared with us today.
Thanks. It's been great. It's been great speaking with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks, Louis. That's been today's episode of TechRect. If you or someone you know wants to be on the show, email techrectpodcast@gmail.com and we'll get it scheduled. See you next time.